What would you do if your day started without coffee, without conversation, and with a bell loud enough to wake the dead? This isn't a survival game. It's just an average Tuesday for a medieval monk. From breakfasts that taste like concrete to spiritual showdowns with a goat named Joan, what you're about to hear will make you want to join the monastery or run screaming from it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling cozy already, post your location and local time. I love seeing who's drifting off from where. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts, of course, with a bell. The hour is well before dawn. Outside, a fine mist has settled over the fields, and the sun is nowhere to be seen. The only creatures stirring are a few disoriented chickens and you. You and the other monks, all beginning your day not by sunlight, but by sound. The monastery bell is not subtle. It clangs with the urgency of Judgment Day, yanking you out of a dream you won't remember. You rise, not in a rush. Nothing in this life is rushed, but with deliberate motion. There's a pecking order to who gets to splash their face at the basin first, and you're still low enough to need to move quickly if you want a less murky rinse. The cloister is cold. The stone beneath your soles sucks the heat from your body like a hungry ghost. But there's no complaining. Not allowed anyway. You pull your habit tighter, feeling the scratch of wool on your arms. Someone coughs 2 cells over. Another groans softly. It's all part of the morning chorus. You're heading to Matins, the first of 8 daily prayer services. It's dark, but the chapel is already aglow with flickering candlelight. As you enter, your eyes adjust to the warm amber shimmer that dances across ancient walls. There's the scent of beeswax, old stone, and a hint of incense from the last vigil. You take your place in the choir stalls worn smooth by centuries of shuffling feet and bony elbows. The abbot gives a subtle nod, and the chant begins. Gregorian tones rise, one voice beginning, the others following in perfect solemn harmony. You don't need to think, the words have long since etched themselves into your memory. This is your life now, regulated, repetitive, but somehow peaceful. The monks around you sway gently as they sing. A few have their eyes closed, not from ecstasy, but from sheer exhaustion. It's still not even 5 hours a.m. The chant fills the space like warm broth fills an empty stomach. You find your place in it, note by note. Historians still argue whether such early rising genuinely brought monks closer to the divine, or simply reflected a cultural obsession with discipline and denial. Some suggest it was about spiritual vigilance. Others think it was just because candles were expensive and daylight was precious. But as the final amen echoes into silence, you don't feel divine. You feel awake, sort of, and cold, definitely cold. Outside, the sky is just beginning to blush pink. You have exactly 12 minutes before the next bell. Enough time to visit the privy if you're lucky, or maybe just enough time to question once again why you ever thought this would be a simpler life. You shuffle out of the chapel like a half-frozen duckling in a line of similarly dazed brethren. The path to the washroom is slick with dew, and your toes curl instinctively when they touch the cold flagstones. The air outside is bracing, a medieval euphemism for absolutely frigid. There is no heated bath, no steam, no lavender-scented soaps, just a stone basin filled with water that feels like it's been piped straight from the Alps. You dunk your hands in with all the enthusiasm of someone volunteering for finger amputation. Then the worst part, the face splash. The water hits like a betrayal, a full slap from Mother Nature herself. One monk nearby lets out a high-pitched yelp and then looks around guiltily, as if Brother Bernard will report him for emotional indulgence. You all know the rules endure in silence. Endure everything in silence, ideally, with an expression of mild, smug sanctity. Once you've cleansed your face, and maybe your soul, depending on how icy that splash was, you whisper your private morning prayers. Lips move, no sound emerges. This is the sacred murmur dance performed at the same basin by thousands of monks before you. It's not just about cleanliness. Washing is a symbolic reset. You are washing away the remnants of sleep sin and dreams you'd rather not recount. Did you dream of roast goose again? Best not confess that one today. Monasteries vary in their exact routines, but the basic structure remains prayer-labor meals, more prayer, and a generous helping of self-denial. You've only been up for half an hour, and already you're questioning your attachment to physical comfort. Historians still argue whether monks were truly as self-mortifying as they appeared, or if many simply got used to it over time. Some abbeys were notorious for being stricter than others. At Cluny, for instance, the rituals were so complex that novices often broke rules just by forgetting the choreography of walking through a doorway. You wrap a damp woolen cloak around your shoulders and make your way back toward the cloister. The path glistens underfoot, a scattering of early frost catching the first real light of dawn. Somewhere, a bird chirps blissfully unaware of your chapped hands. Inside the dormitory, other monks are finishing their washing or kneeling in silent reflection. Brother Alric, the oldest among you, moves with the solemn slowness of a relic. His eyes are half closed, lips pursed in what may be prayer, or possibly just stubborn refusal to speak to anyone before sunrise. The dormitory itself is sparse wooden bunks, straw mattresses, a few personal wooden crosses carved into the beams. You have a small wooden peg where your robe hangs still slightly damp from yesterday's rainfall. Privacy is not a monastic luxury. There is a rhythm to this life that is both comforting and crushing. No decisions, no surprises, just bells, prayers, and the occasional goat-related emergency. By the time the next bell tolls, lauds, you are slightly drier, marginally warmer, and entirely resigned to the knowledge that this day will be nearly indistinguishable from the last, and from the one before that, and from the hundreds to come, except maybe for the porridge. That always manages to be worse than expected. The second bell tolls with a lower, more resonant clang. You know it well. It means lauds the dawn prayer has begun. You file once again into the chapel, which now flickers with more candles and the faintest blush of natural light sneaking through the stained glass. The windows, still dew-slicked and slightly warped, catch that pale gold and scatter it in sleepy halos across the pews. You take your place in the choir stalls. These are not the plush, comfortable seats of modern churches. They are carved wooden enclosures with high backs and narrow benches. Over time, your backside becomes well acquainted with the geometry of discomfort. The cantor raises a hand, and like clockwork, the chant begins. Today, it's Psalm 148. You don't need a book. You know it by heart. Praise the Lord from the heavens. Praise Him in the heights. Your voice blends with the others in a low, droning harmony that fills the chamber like morning mist. Gregorian chant is not meant to entertain. It's meant to lift the soul, or at least keep it too drowsy to commit sin before breakfast. The tones rise and fall in hypnotic waves. You sing on autopilot, part of a centuries-old river of sound that never truly stops. The breath you take before each verse feels like a form of spiritual CPR. There's a monk 2 rows down whose voice always cracks on the same note. Another leans slightly to the left, as though perpetually trying to escape the pull of gravity. You all stay mostly still, mostly focused, but your thoughts drift inevitably. Sometimes you wonder how monks ever got anything done with all this chanting. Some historians argue the sheer frequency of prayer was a form of social control, an ever-present reminder that no thought should be free from scrutiny. Others believe it was deeply soothing, a kind of divine white noise that made manual labor and personal hardship more bearable. Whatever the intent it's working, you feel calm. The chant cushions your brain in a sort of woolly haze. You don't think about tomorrow or yesterday, or whether Brother Peter really did steal your candle stub last week. You just sing. A candle sputters to your right. The wax pools and hardens like milk spilled on stone. The scent of smoke mingles with frankincense, a combination you now associate with divine mysteries and mild headaches. Outside, the sky has turned a soft cornflower blue. A robin hops along the windowsill, cocking its head like it's judging your pitch. You stare at it for a beat too long and miss your entry into the next verse. No matter. The chant swells and covers your laps like a tide erasing a footprint. There's comfort in anonymity. Your voice is not your own, it's part of the whole. One note in a sonorous blanket that has blanketed this monastery since the walls were damp mortar. As lauds ends, there's a moment of complete stillness. No coughs, no shuffling, just breath. And then, as always, motion returns. Robes rustle, sandals scrape, and the monks rise in a practiced wave. You're not sure whether your spirit has ascended, but at least your legs are stretched. For now, that'll do. Silence isn't just encouraged in the monastery, it's canon law. Or at least it feels like it. After lauds, the quiet becomes even thicker, like a wool blanket someone's thrown over your thoughts. You walk back through the cloister walkways, past ivy-draped walls, and the occasional bird making what feels like offensively joyful noise. You want to say good morning to Brother Giles, but instead, you glance sideways and give him the approved monastic eyebrow raise. It's subtle. He nods back, equally subdued. This is considered a whole conversation. Speech, after all, leads to temptation. Idle chatter breeds pride, gossip, exaggeration, the gateway sins. And so the monks developed a whole parallel language, a system of hand gestures, nods, and occasionally hilarious mimes. You once saw Brother Matthew spend 2 full minutes flapping his arms and pointing to a jug before anyone realized he wanted chicken broth. The cloister paths are wide shaded and designed to encourage walking meditation. You pace in time with your thoughts. When something disturbs the peace, like a dropped book, or an accidental sneeze, every head turns silently scandalized. You bow slightly in apology, as though you've just broken wind in a cathedral. Historians still debate how strictly silence was enforced across different orders. The Benedictines were famously tight-lipped, but even they allowed talking in designated zones. Some abbeys had speaking rooms where monks could finally express things like, "I'm pretty sure I'm allergic to this bread mold," or, "Is it Tuesday again?" You make your way to the calefactory, the only heated room in the entire abbey. It's modestly warm, a kind of lukewarm hope rather than actual comfort. A few monks sit here reading silently or warming their hands. The air smells faintly of ash and something like old onions. You settle on a stool and reach for your wax tablet. If you must think in silence, you might as well jot something down. Perhaps a line from this morning's chant, or a small sketch of the chapel's rafters. You're no artist, but drawing quietly feels subversively luxurious. Suddenly, Brother Thomas sneezes loudly. Every head in the room jerks up. He turns beet red, then holds up two fingers in a gesture that means, loosely translated, "I apologize. My sinuses have betrayed me." You and the others respond with the gentle wave that signals forgiveness. Monastic sign language is nothing if not efficient. And yet the silence is not oppressive. It's more like a pause between thoughts, like that brief stillness before the next page turns. You start to understand why monks insisted on it. Without all the usual noise of life, your own thoughts become more visible and occasionally more annoying. Still, the discipline works. Without conversation, your mind quiets in other ways. The world narrows to footsteps, candlelight, and the slow passage of the sun through stained glass. You rise and move on, careful not to let your robe swish too loudly. In the monastery, even a well-timed sigh is a social event. Breakfast is not a grand affair in the monastery. In fact, calling it breakfast feels a bit ambitious. You could just as easily call it mild penance with a spoon. But the bell rings again, and you file into the refectory, that echo-prone dining hall, where talking is still forbidden, and stomachs often gurgle in betrayal. Long wooden tables stretch across the stone chamber, and you take your usual spot beside Brother Edmund, who has a habit of chewing dramatically. The meal is served without ceremony. A ladle of lukewarm barley porridge, a piece of hard bread that could double as a roof tile, and if it's a generous day, a smudge of sour cheese. The water jug is passed down the line, clinking gently against the cups. No wine today. Not until the evening. As you spoon up the porridge, the reader begins. Each meal is accompanied by readings from Scripture, the Rule of Saint Benedict, or, on particularly exciting days, a martyrology. Today's selection appears to be about Saint Agnes, who was martyred at 13 for refusing to marry a Roman noble. You listen as you chew, trying to focus on the virtue of chastity, while wondering if it's possible to dislocate your jaw on dry bread. The monk reading stands at a lectern, elevated on a small platform, droning in an unwavering tone that suggests he's either very holy or very bored. His voice ricochets off the vaulted ceiling like a Gregorian tennis match. This is the soundtrack of your sustenance, theology, and gruel. Historians still argue whether the food was truly as awful as records suggest. Some believe monks exaggerated their hardship for spiritual clout. Others point to abbey ledgers that confirm entire years spent eating nothing but leeks and rainwater. Exceptions existed. The monks of Cluny were known for their culinary indulgences. Some even had access to cinnamon. Scandalous. Back in your abbey, the meals are plain, but filling enough. The porridge glues your ribs together just long enough to reach the next prayer. The bread is harder than sin itself, but you learn to soak it slowly, patiently, in your cup. And if you really want to treat yourself, you imagine it's cake. You glance around the table. Eyes are lowered. Chewing is slow and reverent. Still with me after the cold baths and barley porridge. Then you, my friend, are part of the rare 1% who actually enjoy history with a twist of goat-related chaos. If that sounds like you consider subscribing, because trust me, it only gets weirder from here. A few monks close their eyes while they eat, not in ecstasy, but to better concentrate on the words being read, or to block out the sight of porridge that resembles wet sand. You try to listen to the passage again. Something about spiritual fortitude and the cleansing fire of suffering. You nod slowly, thoughtfully. Internally, you're just trying not to gag on a particularly chewy raisin that's made a surprise appearance in your bowl. At the end of the reading, there's a collective pause. The lector bows, closes the book, and steps down. You and everyone else sit in still silence for 30 heartbeats, contemplating either divine mysteries or whether your jaw is permanently misaligned. Then comes the final bell. Bowing in unison, you rise. The dishes are cleared silently with soft clinks and nods. A few monks wipe down the tables with stiff linen cloths. You glance back at your empty bowl, thankful in the way one only can be after surviving a culinary ordeal. Your stomach may not be satisfied, but your soul, they say, is fed. You head next to the scriptorium, where the real endurance trial begins, not of body, but of back eyes, an unspoken resentment toward the person who assigned you the book of hours with the tiniest possible script. The room is lit by narrow, arched windows and the golden glow of oil lamps. Dust floats in the beams of light like tiny saints ascending. Your workstation is the same as always, a sloped wooden desk, an ink pot with a cork stopper, 2 quills, one always a bit too blunt, and a rag that used to be white. There's also a small knife for scraping away your inevitable mistakes, not because you're sinful, but because even angels would smudge ink after 3 hours of writing in Gothic minuscule. You settle in and begin. The task today, transcribing Psalms. Again, you dip your quill shake off the excess and carefully draw the first letter, a capital B, elaborate and looping its interior, shaped like a curled fern. This is your art, your prayer in ink. Each letter takes a small eternity. You breathe shallowly, trying not to smudge the parchment with your sleeve. You don't dare sneeze. The monk across from you, Brother Anselm, already has 3 red blotches on his page and keeps muttering silently what may or may not be theological curses. The room is quiet, save for the soft scratches of quills, the occasional rustle of parchment, and the unfortunate wheeze of Brother Thomas, who insists he's not ill. The air smells of ink wax and that ever-present monastery musk, a delicate blend of damp robes and theological fervor. Historians still argue whether all monks copied texts equally or whether some, particularly the more artistic or literate, got better assignments. It's clear to you that someone in the Abbey has it in for you. How else to explain this footnote-filled scroll that appears to have been written by a squirrel on a caffeine binge? Still, there are rewards. The pleasure of a perfectly curved S. The way gold leaf catches the lamplight just so. The quiet pride when the abbot pauses behind your shoulder, nods imperceptibly, and moves on. You don't live for praise, but if you did, that nod would be a standing ovation. Your neck starts to ache after the first hour. You pause to stretch, rolling your shoulders and flexing your cramped fingers. Across the room, another monk massages his temples and mutters into his sleeve, "The universal sign of one more psalm, and I will eat this quill." A curious beetle skitters across your page. You shoo it away gently. No sudden movements here. Ink stains are eternal. Unless you scrape them off, of course, which you do. Carefully, reverently, as though erasing sin. Sometimes you dream of copying something different, an herbal treatise perhaps, or a book of strange beasts. Anything but psalms. Once you heard of a monastery in Ireland where monks illustrated entire books of the Gospels with fanciful creatures and swirling patterns that had more to do with imagination than scripture. You almost took a vow of pilgrimage on the spot. But for now, you copy, word by word, letter by letter. You may never finish this book. You may not even live to see the end of Psalm 119, but the act itself is holy. And if not holy, at least hypnotic. By midday, your fingers are blotchy with ink. Your back feels like it's auditioning for sainthood, and you've made only 5 inches of progress. You close the scroll, gently stretch once more, and pray for divine mercy. Or maybe just better lighting tomorrow. After the mind-numbing stillness of the scriptorium, even the modest relief of midday rest feels like luxury. You return to your cell, a stone box barely wider than your outstretched arms, and prepare for the most sacred of monastic rituals, the not-quite nap. There is no bed, of course. Just a wooden bench with a threadbare woolen blanket and a straw pillow that smells faintly of cabbage. You sit, you fold your legs, you try to ignore the ache in your spine, your neck, your soul. Technically, this period is meant for quiet meditation, reflection, or private prayer. But everyone knows that reflection often becomes accidental dozing. You bow your head, close your eyes, and drift. Just enough to see a goat riding a bishop like a warhorse. Then clang, another bell. 14 minutes of slumped contemplation, and you're reborn as a reluctant participant in divine routine. You stretch slowly. A vertebra pops. Brother Oswin in the next cell groans softly. Whether from a spiritual epiphany or a crick in his neck, you'll never know. No one talks. That's the rule. Again, the cell is cold and smells of damp parchment, but you don't mind. You've spent long enough here that your brain accepts discomfort as baseline existence. The flickering of light from the narrow window above your bench marks the passing of the sun like a medieval sundial you never asked for. Historians still argue whether monks actually managed to nap during these brief intervals or if they just sat quietly and tried to imagine what napping might feel like. Some orders encouraged a bit of shut-eye, while others viewed it as sloth wrapped in a blanket of sin. You personally consider your occasional snoring as a form of spiritual release. Your robe bunches awkwardly around your knees. Your ankles are cold, and your elbows don't know where to go. But somehow the moment feels peaceful. There's no chanting, no ink-stained fingers, no barley porridge. Just breath-soft creaking of ancient wood and the knowledge that for a few more minutes, nobody expects anything of you until they do, and they will. The bell rings again, its tone just slightly more insistent. You rise like a reluctant saint gathering your robe and your thoughts. Another task awaits, another hour to offer, another small surrender to the rhythm that rules this place. But for now, you walk slower, you move quieter, and you allow yourself the rarest of luxuries, a yawn. Your next duty takes you to the infirmary, where science, superstition, and mashed herbs blend into a surprisingly pungent paste. The monk in charge, Brother Perrin, known unofficially as the Mixer, greets you with a grunt and hands you a mortar that smells like honey and regret. Today's concoction involves wine ash, a bit of dried rosemary, and something called blessed thistle, which sounds hopeful but looks like lawn clippings. You don't question the recipe. Questioning gets you extra stirring duty. The infirmary is tucked into a quieter corner of the abbey with high windows that let in pale, forgiving light. Beds line the walls, though few are occupied today. One novice moans dramatically, gripping his side like a martyr. You hand him a decoction of boiled garlic and murmur the approved phrase, "Be of good courage." He glares at you, unimpressed. You pass shelves lined with glass vials, bundles of dried herbs and pots, labeled in Latin with names like unguentum de vipera, ointment of viper. You don't ask if it actually contains snake. Probably. Maybe. Hopefully not. Historians still argue whether monastic medicine was effective or just elaborate wishful thinking. On one hand, monks preserved classical medical texts and pioneered hospitals. On the other, they frequently prescribed treatments like powdered pearls and rabbit brains. The line between remedy and medieval prank was thin. You crush ingredients with the pestle, the rhythmic grinding echoing softly in the room. Brother Perrin reads aloud from a manuscript detailing the humoral balance. According to Galenic theory, your illness stems from an excess of black bile, or possibly wind. Wind is a popular scapegoat. A patient limps in clutching his foot. "Boil," he mouths. You nod solemnly. That's a standard job warm. Compress a splash of wine to sterilize, and a bandage that will definitely fall off by vespers. You fetch a cloth heated over the brazier and gently press it to his skin. He winces, then mouths, "Bless you." A rare word, and worth more for its silence. The herbal closet is your favorite part. It smells of sage marjoram and beeswax. You inhale deeply, wishing briefly that your scriptorium smelled this good. You collect supplies, dried comfrey for sprains, chamomile for nerves, and mint, officially medicinal, unofficially used by Brother Perrin, to freshen his breath before speaking to the abbot. One monk, old Brother Leofric, lies curled under a thick blanket. He's had a chill for nearly a year. You sit beside him, ladle a spoonful of warm broth from a clay pot, and carefully feed it to him. His eyes flutter open briefly. He smiles. You squeeze his hand. This is monkhood too. Not just chanting and copying, but quiet acts of care. You learn that healing is less about miracle cures and more about presence. Patience, replacing a soiled cloth without flinching. Sitting with someone through a fevered hour when no words are needed. Outside, a rain begins to fall. You close the shutters slowly, savoring the scent of petrichor creeping in. Brother Perrin mutters about humidity and its wicked effect on phlegmatic temperaments. You nod wisely. That's probably true. Maybe. The last task is to mix a salve for a novice who claims to have walking boils. You add the ingredients carefully: honey ash, egg yolk, and just a touch of vinegar. It looks like bad custard. It probably works, or at least distracts them long enough to feel better. You place the jar on the shelf, label it, and rinse your hands in a basin of rosemary water. The scent clings to your skin, an aromatic reminder that today at least you made someone feel slightly less miserable. The Abbey Garden is your next destination, and it greets you with the slightly sour aroma of compost and the unmistakable bleating of a goat in emotional distress. You've been assigned to the afternoon agricultural rota, herbs vines, and whatever emotional support the goats require. You suspect you are more farmer than monk some days. The monastery gardens are divided into tidy quadrants, each with a different purpose: vegetables, medicinal herbs, orchard trees, and a small vineyard that hasn't produced more than 3 drinkable bottles in a decade. Still, it's your sacred duty to pretend those grapes are promising. You start with the onions. They're hardy and reliable, unlike the fussy leeks who tend to bolt at the first sign of drama. You pull weeds carefully, feeling the sun warm your back through your habit. It's almost comfortable until you kneel and remember that monastic soil is equal parts clay and regret. You squint toward the fence where the goat is staring at you. It is, of course, Brother Crispin's goat, named Joan. She has escaped again. You mutter a prayer under your breath and shuffle toward her. She backs up, bleats dramatically, and knocks over a basket of pruned sage. You give her a look that says you are testing my vow of peace. Joan stares back, unrepentant. Historians still argue whether monastic agricultural labor was more spiritual discipline or pragmatic necessity. The rule of Saint Benedict insists on manual work, but some abbeys grew so wealthy they hired lay brothers to do the digging. Yours isn't rich, you dig. After corralling Joan twice, you prune a few stubborn vines and inspect the grafted apple tree for signs of progress. Grafting is an ancient practice, cutting a branch from one tree and attaching it to another, hoping they'll fuse into fruitful harmony. It's both delicate and slightly magical. You gently secure a new graft and whisper a half-joke prayer. Lord, make these apples less mealy this year. Brother Hugo is watering the herb beds nearby. He waves with 2 fingers, a monastic sign meaning need help with time, or possibly I found that missing hoe. You nod and retrieve the watering can. The scent of mint fennel and chamomile rises as the water hits the soil. Near the edge of the garden, you tend the beehives, carefully, reverently. The monks treat bees like flying monks, diligent, silent mostly, and incredibly productive. You lift a frame slowly, checking for signs of wax moths. None today. You nod respectfully to the bees as though they care. At the far wall, the novice Brother Aldred is trying to talk to a tomato plant. He believes encouraging words help it grow. You admire his optimism. Also, he's the only one who hasn't yet realized those are actually peppers. You spend the last half hour with the orchard trees, brushing dirt from the roots, untangling ivy, and humming quietly. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the tilled earth. Your hands are calloused, your knees are damp, but your mind is quiet. In this patch of earth, with goats' grafts and unreasonably philosophical tomatoes, the world feels both ancient and immediate. You're not just growing food, you're preserving a rhythm older than the abbey itself. One breath, one weed, one stubborn goat at a time. The hour of confession arrives with the weight of stale guilt and the faint hope of forgiveness. You make your way toward the chapel again this time, not for chant or ritual, but to unpack the week's spiritual luggage, some of it heavier than others. You're not quite sure whether your grudge about Brother Thomas's turnip qualifies as a mortal sin, but it's been festering. The confession queue forms in the usual order of seniority. You're somewhere in the middle, flanked by monks who either look angelically serene or suspiciously nervous. The atmosphere is one of hushed solemnity, broken only by the occasional foot shuffle or the gentle clack of rosary beads. You're rehearsing your list, silently coveting produce, thinking impure thoughts about Sister Adela's bread loaves. Purely culinary, of course, and an uncharitable urge to hide Brother Crispin's goat bell. You take a deep breath, not sure whether to feel anxious or mildly ridiculous. When your turn comes, you step into the side alcove. There's no confessional booth, just a curtained-off space with a worn stool and the faint scent of lavender oil. The priest is behind the screen, and his voice is low and gravelly, like old parchment being turned. You kneel, begin the sign of the cross, and launch into your litany. It comes out in a rush, part prayer, part babble. You keep your voice level, your tone penitent, your sins mild enough to avoid raised eyebrows, but real enough to clear your conscience. Forgive me, Father, for I have longed for the taste of roasted leeks in a way that may border on idolatry. Go on, he says. And I was unkind in thought when Brother Anselm scratched the scriptorium desk. I considered smiting him. With a quill? The priest clears his throat, probably stifling a laugh. Go on. And I briefly resented a goat. Historians still argue whether confession in the medieval period was more about spiritual purification or social control. Some abbots emphasized fear of damnation. Others took a gentler, more introspective approach. Your confessor today seems firmly in the gentle scolding and vague wisdom school. When you finish, he gives you a short penance, 3 psalms and 1 act of charity. You wonder what counts as charity in a place where no one owns anything and everyone already shares porridge. Perhaps you'll polish Brother Leofric's sandals. You leave the alcove lighter, spiritually exfoliated. A few monks glance at you as you pass. No one speaks, but there's a mutual understanding. Everyone's carrying something. Everyone's trying not to punch Brother Thomas. Back in the cloister, you sit quietly for a while, watching dust float in the golden, late afternoon light. You feel unburdened, slightly amused, and very aware that spiritual enlightenment has not, in fact, made you immune to food envy. Still, it's something, a small release, a reminder that you are in the grand scheme of things, just another flawed soul trying to make it through Vespers without smacking someone with a hymnal. You rise, adjust your robe, and head toward the next bell. By now, the sun hovers low over the abbey walls, casting golden slants of light that make even the dust motes look holy. You're headed toward the chapel again, not for prayer this time, but to assist with one of the stranger aspects of monastic life relics and pilgrims. The abbey has to its proudest claim a sliver of St. Rumwold's femur. Or at least, that's what the abbot insists. It resides in a reliquary the size of a shoebox adorned with carved angels and a small sapphire that might actually be blue glass. It's brought out on special days, and today happens to be the feast of somewhat important saint you've never heard of. You light candles, as instructed, careful to keep the wax from dripping onto the linen altar cloth. Pilgrims begin to trickle in travelers with weary faces and muddy boots. Some carry children. Others carry scrolls to be blessed. A few just carry aches visible in their slow, reverent steps. You help set the relic on its velvet cushion. The room hushed as if the toe bone itself might suddenly grant visions. One woman weeps silently, brushing her fingertips against the glass. A man mutters a prayer so fast you suspect he's trying to cram a week's worth of sins into one syllable, and you bow dutifully. But you've seen this relic up close. Once when dusting it, you noticed the toe was oddly shaped, suspiciously like a chicken bone. You've never said it aloud. To do so would be unthinkable. But the doubt lingers, a quiet cluck in the back of your mind. Historians still argue whether most relics were authentic or symbolic stand-ins. Some believe early monasteries sincerely believed in the sacredness of these fragments. Others think the traffic in dubious body parts became an accidental economy of belief, a holy pyramid scheme with bits of saints instead of stock. But authenticity aside, the effect is real. The pilgrims kneel some clutching rosaries, others just their own shoulders. There's something about the shared hush, the soft candlelight, the centuries of repetition that makes the room feel deeply, profoundly still. You help guide one elderly man to the bench, his legs too weak to kneel. He thanks you in a whisper. You nod. You've seen that look before, the blend of hope-exhaustion and superstitious awe. He doesn't care if the bone is real. He just wants a reason to believe something is. After the small procession ends, you help return the reliquary to its niche. The box clicks shut. The candles are snuffed. And like that, the magic is over. Back in the hallway, Brother Baldwin leans in close and whispers, "It's definitely poultry," then straightens and walks off before you can react. You're left blinking alone with your suspicions and a flickering ember of shared heresy. The evening bell tolls. You head toward Vespers with a heart that's somehow heavier and lighter at once. Relics may be bones or symbols or well-preserved bits of poultry, but the belief they inspire, that's real. That's what you're part of now. As the sun dips fully below the horizon, a rare ripple of anticipation hums through the cloister. It's fair day in the nearby village. The abbey doesn't officially attend such worldly amusements, of course, but the cloister gate overlooks the main road, and let's just say the view has become remarkably popular this evening. You find a shadowed spot near the herb wall where the view is just right. From here, you can see the flicker of torchlight, Hear the distant thrum of lutes and catch the occasional burst of laughter that feels borderline scandalous. The fair is alive with color smells and temptations, roasted meats, braided ribbons, the scent of cider and pine pitch. A few novices are already peeking through the ivy-covered fence slats, eyes wide. No one speaks, but expressions say plenty. Brother Said looks deeply fascinated by a juggler tossing flaming pins. Brother Bertwin appears emotionally compromised by the sight of a smiling woman selling honey cakes. You're just soaking it in. It's not envy, not really just curiosity. That world feels like a dream you once had. Not a bad one, just distant. Like another life you didn't live. Every so often, one of the monks makes the sign for enough gawking, back to prayers, and the crowd thins slightly before inevitably reforming. The abbey has rules, but it also has corners. And from this corner, you see a pair of acrobats tumble through the torchlight, their limbs painting wild arcs against the night. Historians still argue how much monasteries truly isolated themselves from village life. Some were strict sanctuaries, others traded hired laborers, even hosted traveling musicians, albeit reluctantly. Your abbey, like most lands, somewhere in the murky middle. The monks stay behind the wall, but their ears are tuned to the laughter outside it. A sudden gust of wind carries music straight to your hiding spot. It's fast, cheerful, shockingly rhythmic. Not a chant, not a psalm, just music. And your foot traitorous thing taps along. Then a shriek of delight, someone's won a game. Then a pig squeals. Then something crashes. You exchange looks with Brother Thomas. Is that what joy sounds like? Or mild injury, hard to say. A flash of color catches your eye. A child in a bright red cloak runs past the fence. She looks toward the abbey, then sticks out her tongue, cheeky and free. You smile. Before you remember, you're supposed to be serene. You stay until the last torch fades, until the drums dim, and the air smells only of damp grass again. Then, slowly, you rise. Your knees complain. Your soul doesn't. Not really. Back in your cell, you imagine the fair continuing in your dreams, dancers twirling bells, jingling, roasted apples filling the air with sweetness. You'll wake to prayer again, but for now, the night is yours. Quietly, secretly yours. Night falls fully heavy and thick as wool. The abbey walls seem taller in the dark, their shadows stretched long by the flickering torchlight of the last hallway patrol. You return to the dormitory where rows of wooden cots line the stone chamber, like narrow boats docked for the night. You slip into your usual spot, cot number 11, squeaky frame, scratchy blanket, faint scent of elderberries from whoever last used the corner basket as a footrest. You lie back, robes still on, as per the rules. Sleep must be ready to strike, not coddled into existence. But sleep rarely comes easily. Not in here. The dormitory is its own strange world where silence reigns, but whispers still find a way through. You hear them hushed sobs 2 cots over. Someone's dreaming badly, or maybe grieving. Another monk mutters in Latin, either prayers or leftovers from a miscopied psalm. The wind whistles through the shutter, cracks like a bored ghost with nothing better to do. You roll onto your side, staring at the wooden beam above. A knot in the grain looks vaguely like the Virgin Mary if you squint, or a startled badger. Hard to tell in this light. Then come the dreams. You're walking through the garden. Only the onions are singing, and Joan the goat is preaching a sermon on humility. You try to take notes, but your quill melts into a candle, and your hand turns to beeswax. You wake just before the goat demands tithes. Someone across the room whispers a name, Elfric. Maybe a memory. Maybe a ghost. You pull your blanket tighter, wondering how many monks have whispered in this very spot across centuries. How many feet shuffled to this bed? How many dreams soaked into these stones? Historians still argue about the emotional lives of monks. Were they content in their solitude? Or did the silence mask constant longing for freedom, for family, for some warm soup that didn't taste like despair? The dormitory tells no secrets, just echoes. The crying quiets, the murmurs fade. You lie awake for a long time, not exactly worried, not exactly peaceful, just aware of your breath, of the cold, of the strange stillness that happens when 50 people agree not to speak but forget to stop thinking. You whisper a prayer, not from the Psalms, not from the rule, but your own. Let me sleep without dreaming of goats tonight. A gust rattles the shutter. You close your eyes again. Sleep comes slowly, wearing sandals, carrying a candle, muttering its own monastic lullaby. Morning's golden light is a distant memory, now replaced by the cool flicker of candles as the community prepares for one of the few genuine joys in the monastic calendar, a feast day. Today is the feast of Saint Swithin, patron saint, of well rain mostly, and the monks are allowed just enough celebration to call it a break in the routine. You rise with less grumbling than usual. The air smells different, less of must, and wet wool, more of something vaguely edible. You shuffle into the refectory where the tables have been adorned with bundles of dried lavender and marigold. You know it's a special day when there's decoration and a new tablecloth. The meal begins as always with a reading, but today it's from a collection of saintly legends, and the reader sounds suspiciously pleased to recount how Saint Swithin once caused a drought to end by tripping over a barrel. It might be apocryphal. It's definitely amusing. Then comes the food. Not porridge, not barley. No. Today, you are blessed with something far more exotic, boiled eel. Not everyone's favorite, but undeniably festive by monastic standards. You also receive a crust of bread, softened with honey, a roasted turnip envy, finally satisfied, and a rare treat, cheese that isn't gray. You eat in the same silence as always, but today, the silence feels warmer. A few monks even smile. Brother Aldred tears his bread into little hearts and tries to pass one to Brother Sed, who pointedly ignores him while hiding a smirk. After the meal comes a special liturgical celebration. The choir assembles in full voice, and the chants today are longer, more elaborate. You sing with gusto, knowing you won't have to copy anything afterward. The resonance of the hymns fills the chapel, echoing off the ancient vaults, vibrating in your chest like a second heartbeat. Historians still argue whether feast days were truly joyous for monks or simply less grim interludes. The rule of Saint Benedict allows for moderation in celebration, but even moderation feels luxurious when your normal life involves arguing over beet rations. This feast also marks the shifting of seasons. St. Swithin's Day traditionally signals the start of the Abbey's autumnal rhythm harvest. Preparation, longer chants, thicker robes. You feel the turn in the air, already a faint crispness just beginning to nibble at your fingertips. Later, you help prepare votive candles for a small evening procession. The wax is warm and smells faintly of rosemary. You carry your candle with slow steps following the line of monks out into the cloister courtyard where the stars begin to prick the sky. You chant under your breath as you walk the words, ancient, soothing, incomprehensible, in places, but lovely nonetheless. The flames waver in the breeze. You pass the herb beds, the orchard, the goat pen. Joan is blessed and entirely unimpressed, and return to the chapel for one last prayer. The feast winds down, not with revelry, but with rest. You file back to the dormitory as usual, but your blanket feels a bit warmer tonight. Your dreams a little less ridiculous. The bell rings long and low, but this time it's not for prayer. It's for Brother Alric. He died quietly in the night. No drama. Just a final sigh that someone said sounded like the last line of a chant. He was 92, or close to it, no one's quite sure. He had lived through 3 abbots, 2 famines, and the great incident of the bee swarm in the Psalter. You don't mourn with wailing or rending of robes. This is a monastery. Grief here wears a cowl and keeps its voice down. The body lies in the chapel, wrapped in a simple cloth, his hands folded over a wooden cross. There are no gilded coffins or marble tombs. Just Brother Alric, silent for once, surrounded by candles and the scent of frankincense. Your job today is to dig the grave. The cemetery lies beyond the orchard, past the bees, and the goat pen, in a patch of earth that's always slightly too damp. You take up the spade. The soil is heavy, reluctant. Each scoop lifts a small sigh of centuries. Brother Thomas works beside you. Neither of you speaks. The wind does enough talking. Historians still argue how monastic communities handled death with true spiritual joy or suppressed sadness. The rituals were meant to comfort, but comfort is hard to measure when your closest friends die quietly, and your only solace is another verse of Psalm 23. You line the grave with fresh straw. You carry the wrapped body with reverence. As you lower him in the choir, begins the office of the dead. Slow, deep, solemn. The harmonies seem to settle into the ground with the body. You throw the first handful of dirt. It lands with a soft thump, then another, then more, until all you see is earth and the faint shape of a cross placed atop the mound. Later, you gather with the others in the calefactory. No one says much, but someone leaves a small bundle of mint near the hearth. Brother Alric's favorite, a silent farewell, a small rebellion against oblivion. You lie in bed that night thinking about him, about all the monks who came before, about the fact that someday, perhaps soon, perhaps not, you'll be wrapped in the same cloth, carried by the same hands, remembered with the same silence. And somehow, that feels comforting. You settle deeper into your bed, the straw mattress creaking gently beneath you. The candle stub burns low, flickering shadows across the wall like quiet dancers. Outside, the wind brushes the shutters with a soft hiss as if the world itself is exhaling. Your body feels heavy now, not tired, rested, like earth settling after a long rain. Your breath slows, your thoughts soften, and the day with all its quiet rituals and sacred silliness begins to melt away. You think of the garden of Joan the goat chewing solemnly on a hymn book. You think of the scriptorium and that one perfect S you inked. You think of Brother Alric of mint leaves and laughter of songs sung low and long into the dark. The monastery hums with memory, with rhythm, with peace. Not because it's perfect, but because it is steady, because it holds your small life gently in its old stone hands. You close your eyes. The last bell rings somewhere far away, not a summons this time, but a lullaby. Sleep finds you slowly, like a monk in soft sandals, whispering psalms to the stars. And so your day in the monastery quietly winds down. The funeral bell fades into the night wind, and you curl up beneath your coarse blanket, dreaming of saints' gardens and that turnip you probably shouldn't have wanted. But as you sleep beyond the creaking wooden gate, another world within the abbey begins to stir. Not just prayers and penance, but hammers fermenting ale account ledgers and letters crisscrossing Europe. Because behind these sacred walls lies a silent empire the world rarely notices. Let's rewind a bit this time, through the eyes of an outsider stepping into the monastery, not to find God, but to understand how this place once pulsed at the heart of medieval Europe's economy. Tonight, we're unraveling the strangely profitable story of the Benedictine monks, a network of devout men who, between prayers and psalms, built an economic empire that stretched across Europe. You probably wouldn't last a day here without accidentally spilling ink on a priceless manuscript or dropping a candlestick on your toe. But don't worry, you're not expected to fast chant or keep silence. Just lie back. You enter through a narrow archway. It smells of beeswax and baked rye. The Benedictine Abbey is nestled between forest and stream, and from the outside it looks just like every painting: stone towers, timbered roofs, and a bell hanging in a squat tower. But as you wander the cloister walk, you notice something odd: activity. Real bustling activity. There's a monk in a wool habit hauling firewood. Another is chalking measurements on a stone slab. In the distance, a group of novices, barely past boyhood, are labeling clay jugs of something pungent and bubbly. It's not just prayer here, it's production. This isn't a one-off eccentricity. By the 12th century, Benedictine monasteries weren't just houses of God. They were engines of local economies, thriving on agriculture, brewing, hospitality, manuscript copying, and more. Many abbeys held dozens of farms mills and vineyards under their names, managed like early corporations, but without the need for flashy signage or shareholder meetings. You pass a wooden door, etched with a Latin phrase, ora et labora, pray and work. But clearly, sometimes labora leans heavily toward business strategy. One thing you notice: no one seems rushed. That's part of the trick. While the outside world chases profit through war trade and marriage alliances, these monks do it slowly, deliberately. The rhythm of the day is still tied to bells and prayer, but tucked between matins and vespers, there's accounting. Historians still argue whether the monks were aware of how influential they were economically, or whether it all evolved accidentally from their vows of self-sufficiency. Some suggest the abbots were stealthy masterminds of medieval commerce. Others think it was just good record-keeping and a knack for craft. You walk past a barrel marked with a neat cross and the initials OSB, Order of St. Benedict. It contains not holy water, but ale brewed from a 200-year-old recipe. You'll meet the monks behind that barrel soon. But first, take a seat in the refectory. Dinner is silent, yes, but you'll notice everyone here eats well. Baskets of dark bread, brass pots of lentil stew, and a generous sprinkle of dried herbs that only grow in the abbey's private garden. Even the salt is their own. This isn't extravagance, it's logistics. Everything must be made tracked and shared, even during fasting seasons. And those books lining the walls, they're not for show. Each one hand-copied, each page proof that literacy was not just for lords and kings, but for those who prayed, penned, and profited in equal measure. In the next room, someone's counting coins with an abacus. You're pretty sure that's Brother Stephanus, and the little satchel of coins beside him. That's just today's sales from the guest house. So lie back, stretch out, and breathe deep. You've just stepped into a world where profit and piety dance an oddly graceful waltz. You're up before sunrise, well, not by choice. The monks wake to a bell that rings before the first light creeps across the sky. You rub your eyes, but Brother Marcus is already shuffling past you in a thick wool robe, whispering prayers and heading to the chapel. It's not exactly your idea of a luxury retreat, but then again, this isn't a hotel. This is a Benedictine monastery, and everyone here follows one book, the Rule of St. Benedict. It's a small book, modestly worded, penned in the 6th century by a Roman noble turned hermit named Benedict of Nursia. Think of it less as a holy scripture and more like a corporate manual if the corporation's goal was eternal salvation. Still, the overlap is uncanny. The rule lays out everything: how many hours to pray, how much food to eat, what to wear, when to speak, and more crucially, when not to speak. It's a masterpiece of quiet efficiency, and while it was intended to guide monks to humility and obedience, it also did something completely unintended. It created a blueprint for a sustainable, scalable, and surprisingly profitable way of life. You walk into the chapter room. The monks are gathered reading a daily section of the rule. Today's portion covers the distribution of labor and property. Brother Hugo, reading aloud, recites, "Let all things be the property of the monastery. No one shall call anything his own." You'd think that would squash any notion of wealth, but instead, it enabled collective ownership, pooled resources that grew over centuries. Monks weren't accumulating personal fortunes. They were building shared assets, farms, mills, breweries, even hospitals, all under the radar of kings and lords too distracted by war and taxes. Historians still debate how much of this was Benedict's intent. Was he an early social theorist, a spiritual minimalist, or just someone who liked rules a little too much? What's clear is that his system outlived empires. Monasteries that followed his rule became stable islands of order in a continent often ravaged by chaos. Outside, the sun has risen. You step into the cloister courtyard where a brother is planting cabbages. Nearby, another tends bees. No one barks orders. The schedule is known. Everyone has a task. There's something calming about this until you realize how effective it is. A monastery run by the rule doesn't collapse when an abbot dies. It doesn't depend on charisma or family lineage. It runs like clockwork. And that made it the perfect seed for a business empire. You follow a novice barefoot and carrying a basket of eggs toward the granary. He doesn't notice you. He's reciting psalms under his breath. But you see what he's walking past a line of clay jars with markings that suggest wine vintages, sealed pots of honey, and stacks of wool ready for market. Everything here is meticulously labeled, organized, preserved. You imagine the rule of Saint Benedict having a footnote that reads, also makes for an excellent quarterly report format. In the scriptorium, an older monk is copying the rule itself onto fresh parchment. You peer over his shoulder. He's on the chapter about the cellarer, the monk in charge of food and supplies. The rule says he should be wise-temperate, not given to greed, but also that he should keep detailed accounts and ensure nothing is wasted. You're starting to see it. This wasn't just a spiritual guidebook. It was a management philosophy wrapped in incense and humility. Even the hierarchy is efficient. The abbot oversees the big picture. The prior runs daily operations. The cellarer manages goods. The infirmarian handles the sick. The librarian, yes, there's a librarian, catalogs every scroll and manuscript. It's a bureaucracy without bickering. And while they don't take salaries, these monks are paid in routine ritual and quiet purpose. It's the sort of setup that modern companies spend fortunes trying to replicate with productivity apps and corporate retreats. As you walk back toward your guest cell, a breeze carries the faint sound of chanting. It's soothing, even a little hypnotic. But don't be fooled. Behind that melody is a system, a rule, a centuries-old framework that turned prayer into process and process into prosperity. You wake to the smell of yeast and smoke, not from incense, but from the brewery down the lane. Yes, brewery. Because here at the Benedictine Monastery Ora et Labora, pray and work isn't just a catchy motto. It's a way of life. And sometimes Labora means making some truly excellent beer. You shuffle past the chapel where a few sleepy-eyed brothers are finishing morning prayers and follow your nose to a squat stone building with an arched doorway. Inside, the air is thick with malt steam and the soft clink of wooden tools. Brother Conrad is stirring a copper vat taller than you, muttering both a psalm and a brewing recipe. He barely glances up. Turns out, the monks didn't just brew for fun. Beer was practical, safer than water nourishing during fasts, and a product that could be sold or bartered. And the Benedictines weren't dabblers. By the 9th century, they had refined brewing techniques, kept detailed records of ingredients, and even experimented with hop varieties. They weren't just praying, they were innovating. Brother Conrad offers you a sip from a ladle. It's warm, sweet, a little grassy. Historians still argue whether monks invented some of the first dark beers, or if that honor goes to secular brewers. But what's clear is this monastic beer was the gold standard. Travelers sought it out. Merchants praised its consistency. And because it was made by monks, people trusted it. You sit outside, sipping slowly, and watch as another monk carts away barrels marked with chalk crosses and delivery destinations. Nearby, a novice scrubs out a trough, while another reads aloud from the rule. Idleness is the enemy of the soul, he recites, which probably explains why no one here is ever idle. And beer wasn't the only thing fermenting. The abbey also produced mead cider and wine, each with its own tools, techniques, and monkly overseer. The vineyards were often perched on sunlit hills behind the cloisters, and the wine cellars were cool, damp, and surprisingly vast. The economic savvy didn't stop there. The monks realized early on that consistency and quality created a brand. Even in the Middle Ages, people started to associate Benedictine with craftsmanship. That branding extended to their beer, their manuscripts, even their herbal medicines. And speaking of herbs, Brother Anselm, the herbalist, invites you into a sun-drenched garden where calendula, thyme, and wild fennel grow in tidy rows. He shows you a chart with plant properties and brewing uses. Apparently, some of their ales double as cold remedies. Who knew your bedtime beverage came with a health plan? Back in the brewery, the monks move with quiet precision. They don't speak unless necessary. The tools are basic wooden paddles, clay filters, brass taps, but the results are reliable. Batch after batch, year after year. You realize that while kings waged wars and towns changed hands, these monks kept brewing uninterrupted. One keg is marked for the poor, another for trade, a third for feast days. The rule of Saint Benedict encourages moderation. Yes, but also hospitality. Every visitor gets fed and watered, and often a small flask to take on their journey. You think back to Brother Conrad, now hunched over a ledger. Every expense, every barrel, every guest's rating. Well, maybe not that last one is carefully logged. It's not about greed. It's about stewardship. Even here, in a place dedicated to divine contemplation, nothing is wasted. Not time, not grain, not opportunity. And tonight, when you hear the bell for evening prayers, know that behind the walls of this quiet abbey, a dozen silent hands have kept the ancient machinery turning, fueled by hops hymns and a schedule no one dares ignore. You follow the faint scent of ink and the hush of turned pages into the scriptorium, a long, drafty hall, lined with wooden desks, quills, and candles that sputter in the morning chill. Welcome to the monastery's intellectual engine room. If brewing was their craft beer business, this is their publishing house. At first glance, it looks peaceful. A few monks hunched over parchment heads, bowed copying line after line of Latin text. But don't be fooled, this room hums with quiet urgency. Every stroke of the quill is a business decision. Every completed manuscript is a product ready for exchange, gift, or sale. You take a seat next to Brother Gilbert, who doesn't acknowledge you, but keeps writing, his wrist moving with metronome precision. He's copying a psalter, embellishing the first letter of each stanza with tiny red and gold flourishes. It's not just scripture, it's artwork, a combination of religious devotion and graphic design medieval style. And here's the kicker. They weren't just copying religious texts. Monks reproduced legal codes, medicinal treatises, mathematical manuals, and even travelogues from far-off lands. Historians still argue whether these efforts were purely pious or whether monasteries knew their scribes were generating cultural currency. Either way, the books were valuable and the monasteries knew it. You glance at one finished manuscript on the shelf. It's bound in calfskin decorated with tiny ivy leaves and inscribed with a note gifted to Lord Alaric for his support. That support probably included a few acres of vineyard or a new stone wall. Books were leverage. One scribe whispers a joke to another. You don't catch the Latin, but from the smirk, it wasn't exactly sacred. Occasionally, monks slipped marginal doodles into manuscripts, snails jousting knight's dogs in clerical robes, cats chasing mice through sacred margins. Quiet rebellion, or just a bit of fun after hours of squinting at psalms. The tools are simple goose feather quills, iron gall ink, parchment made from sheep or goat skin. But the results are durable. Some of these books have outlived empires, and unlike oral tradition, manuscripts don't forget, exaggerate, or mumble. In the back corner, Brother Oswin is illuminating a new folio. Gold leaf ultramarine paint, made from crushed lapis lazuli, imported all the way from Afghanistan, and painstakingly thin brushes. The Abbey probably spent more on pigments than on bread this month. But it's an investment. Nobles pay dearly for illuminated books, sometimes with silver, sometimes with protection. Monasteries became cultural hubs, not by accident, but by producing knowledge, preserving it, and trading it wisely. You run your hand along a row of bound volumes. Each took months, sometimes years, to complete. The scriptorium wasn't a hobby, it was production. Quiet, painstaking, and surprisingly scalable. Brother Gilbert sneezes, then mutters a prayer of apology. You offer a silent one yourself for anyone who had to copy the book of Numbers without error or do it twice because a candle fell over mid-chapter. There's a rhythm here. Ink scratch, whisper, turn, over and over. And in that rhythm lies one of the great boring miracles of history. Literacy was not hoarded, but copied and spread. One book at a time. The bell rings for noon. The scribes pause, stretch aching wrists, and file out silently. You linger, looking back at the desks, each one a tiny factory of thought. You've just seen the intellectual backbone of the Benedictine business model, equal parts divine inspiration and very smart paperwork. As the midday sun warms the stones underfoot, you wander into a part of the monastery that feels more like an inn than a cloister. This is the guest house, a large timbered hall lined with simple beds, benches, and the scent of roasting leeks wafting in from a connected kitchen. It's a Benedictine hallmark hospitality, not just as kindness, but as policy. Guests are always welcome here. Pilgrims, scholars, travelers, even the occasional noble. On retreat, all are received with food shelter, and if needed, a warm bucket of water for sore feet. You drop your bag at a straw-filled mattress and glance around. A merchant is snoring in one corner. Across the room, two women in dusty cloaks quietly tend to a toddler. The monastery is a spiritual refuge, but also a very competent bed and breakfast. Brother Matthias, the guest master, glides in with a ledger under one arm and a pot of lentils in the other. He greets each visitor by name. How does he remember them all? And makes a note of their needs. If you're a merchant, he'll offer storage. If you're a scholar, you might get access to the scriptorium. And if you're a lord, he'll send someone to polish the brass on your saddle. Hospitality is sacred, yes, but it's also excellent public relations. The better you treat visitors, the more likely they are to donate land gold or rare books. Historians still argue whether monks genuinely offered charity out of love or understood that a happy guest is a generous one. Probably both. You join a communal meal at a long wooden table. A monk reads from scripture while you eat, but no one speaks. The food is basic, but hearty barley bread, turnip stew, salted fish. A jug of cider is passed hand to hand. You'd think this silence would feel awkward, but it's oddly calming. The rhythm of chewing, sipping, and soft footsteps in the background forms a kind of edible meditation. After the meal, you walk the grounds with a traveler from Gascony. He's grateful for the rest, and even more impressed that the monks didn't charge a coin. You smile, but you know the trick. The monastery doesn't charge yet. Its fame for generosity spreads, attracting more pilgrims, more support, and more clout. You pass the infirmary next. It's quiet, but you peek in. A young monk tends to an elderly woman's feet with warm oil. On a shelf above them sit jars of preserved herbs, linen bandages, and what looks like powdered resin. It's healthcare with hymns, and yes, free. The abbot's office is upstairs. Through a cracked door, you glimpse him discussing grain prices with a steward. So much for isolation. Running a monastery guest house means tracking inventory, scheduling repairs, and yes, occasionally negotiating with a rude baron whose son accidentally stole a goose. The real magic here isn't the generosity, it's the infrastructure. The guest house relies on the monastery's farms, bakery, brewery, infirmary, and scriptorium. It's an entire supply chain built not to impress shareholders, but to honor St. Benedict's vision of self-sufficient, welcoming community. You sit on a bench outside as the sun begins to dip. A new group of guests arrives, dusty and tired. Brother Matthias greets them like old friends. Behind him, a novice hauls in clean sheets. Someone else slices apples. No one seems harried. The system just works. In the guest book by the door, you notice an odd entry. A local lord thanking the monks for curing his gout and promising 3 new oxen in return. That's hospitality in action. You stretch your legs and yawn. Maybe tonight you'll sleep in the guest house instead of the drafty cell. After all, if you're going to dream through history, it might as well be on a mattress with a view of the Abbey Gardens and the faint soothing sound of cider being poured somewhere nearby. The sun's barely crested the hills when you find yourself following a path out of the cloister past the herb garden and the dovecote to a small tower near the boundary wall. Inside, amid scrolls, seals, and wooden filing boxes, sits the abbot, his desk littered with parchments that look suspiciously like legal contracts. Welcome to the financial wing of the monastery. Despite the vow of poverty, the Benedictine order managed a remarkable amount of real estate. Across the countryside, parcels of farmland, vineyards, grist mills, and even full villages belonged to the monastery. Some were gifts from grateful nobles. Others were quietly acquired through inheritance trade or defaulted debts. Each was carefully recorded, monitored, and leveraged. You peek over the abbot's shoulder. He's reviewing a lease contract. A local farmer gets use of monastery land in exchange for 2 sacks of barley, a smoked ham, and seasonal labor. No coins needed. The monastery deals in goods, favors, and meticulous ledgers. Every year, the monks reevaluate who's paying in kind, who's behind, and who might need to be gently reminded by Brother Rufus, who carries both a smile and a notched walking stick. Don't worry, he doesn't hit anyone with it. Probably. A rustle of parchment draws your eye to a map pinned on the wall. It shows properties across 5 counties, fields marked for rotation, orchards noted for plum yield, even a quarry identified as suitable for expansion. This is less a spiritual sanctuary and more the headquarters of a well-oiled feudal logistics network. You follow a steward into the tithe barn, where this year's goods are stacked wool bales, garlic ropes, baskets of turnips, and barrels of lard. No cash here, but plenty of trade value. The barn smells like old straw and economic stability. Historians still debate how much autonomy abbots had over their land portfolios. Some were cautious caretakers. Others acted more like medieval CEOs, making shrewd alliances and outmaneuvering secular rivals. There's one case of a monk persuading a childless knight to donate 3 farms, then promptly installing lay brothers to run them at a tidy surplus. And if you think this power came without consequence, think again. You hear mutters from a passing villager, something about fat monks and fattened geese. Not everyone loves a landlord in a habit, but the truth is, the monastery provided security employment and food stability in regions where the only alternatives were warlords or wandering hunger. Peasants might grumble, but they also lined up at the monastery gates when famine struck or taxes elsewhere became unbearable. You wander through the abbey's stone granary. It's cool and dry, and the air smells faintly of oats and thyme. Everything is sorted by season and region. You notice small tokens nailed above each pile: a carved fish, a triangle, a cross. Primitive bookkeeping still effective. You spot Brother Jerome the cellarer making notes on a wax tablet. He's tracking who borrowed what and when it's due back. Behind him, lay brothers stack fresh hay. There's a rhythm to it, like ants preparing for winter. Except these ants own 4,000 acres and employ scribes. Later, back at the cloister, the abbot passes you a scroll. It's a letter from another monastery across the channel. They're negotiating a joint venture in linen production. Apparently, monastic business isn't just local, it's international. Monks write letters faster than nobles, swing swords, and their diplomatic network stretches as far as any king's reach. You sit beneath an ivy-covered wall, watching a novice tally sacks of rye. Around you, a religious order hums with the quiet energy of contracts, crops, and communal stewardship. This isn't greed, it's stewardship, wrapped in parchment and signed with solemn blessings. As the bells toll, none the monks gather for prayer. Behind their chants lie the rustle of leases, the clink of tribute, and the faint, earthy scent of real estate managed with divine intent. This morning, you're woken not by chanting, but by the sound of distant murmurs monks at breakfast, speaking in low Latin tones. Not just prayers or pleasantries. These are conversations about wool, yields the price of alum in Florence, and how many barrels of ale might be exchanged for parchment this quarter. It hits you. You're not just sitting among monks. You're sitting inside a network, a medieval startup network to be exact. The Benedictines were never a centralized order. Each monastery operated semi-independently, but they all shared a common rule language and surprisingly nimble system of correspondence. The abbey you're in might have land here in the valley, but it's in regular contact with dozens of others across Europe, from Cornwall to Corinthia. You watch as Brother Petrus writes a letter by candlelight requesting glass panes from a French monastery with surplus and offering a bundle of peppercorns in exchange. That's right, pepper. Exotic, expensive, and totally legitimate monastic currency. Turns out, monks didn't just trade regionally. They traded internationally via networks of merchants and other abbeys. Historians still argue whether this scale of economic collaboration was spontaneous or the result of deliberate coordination by abbots. Was it the medieval version of LinkedIn or just monks being practical? Regardless, the results were remarkable. You follow a donkey cart heading to the nearby port. It's loaded with wool iron tools, medicinal herbs, and sealed jugs. A novice walks alongside, holding a wax tablet of delivery instructions. The goods are bound for a ship that'll carry them downriver, and eventually across the sea to another monastic outpost. Even the trade routes themselves were informed by the monks' extensive travel logs, copied maps, and oral knowledge. Pilgrimage routes doubled as shipping lanes. Letters were relayed through safe abbeys along the way, with messages often coded into psalm references to avoid interception. You pass a room filled with pigeon coops, monastic messenger pigeons. That's right, long before telegraphs, monks were using birds to send short, urgent missives across abbeys. Need more ink. Lord Gerard late on payment. Send cheese recipe. Okay, maybe not the last one, but who's to say? In the monastery's business room, not its official name, but it fits you. Find scrolls detailing agreements with blacksmiths, cooperatives with local artisans, and correspondences about loaned laborers for cathedral construction. Monasteries didn't hoard their resources. They loaned, rented, and collaborated. One document shows a shared vineyard agreement between 3 abbeys. Another records a joint purchase of an oxen team, and yet another references pooled funds to support a smaller, struggling monastery in the highlands. Think of it as monastic venture capital, with a lot more chanting and less risk of sudden market collapse. You wander past the warming room where 3 monks sit around a fire tallying a ledger. You catch phrases like winter surplus and shipment delay. It's not rushed or frantic, just calm, steady, accounting the way only people without stockholders can afford to do. Occasionally, this network even flexed its power politically. Letters between abbeys could carry influence to courts and bishops. A whispered suggestion from a respected abbot might shift a decision in Rome or delay a tax levy in Prague. You return to your room and find a note tucked under your cup, an invitation to join the evening meal with a visiting brother from the Rhineland. It's not just dinner, it's diplomacy. As you sit at the long table that night, you realize the monastery isn't isolated at all. It's a node in a continental web, one woven with silence ink and very good timing. And in a world of chaos, war, and fleeting power, this network of black-robed entrepreneurs quietly endured. As the late morning sun casts long lines through the cloister arches, you hear something you didn't expect: laughter. Not raucous or loud, but the quiet chuckle of monks examining tiny slips of parchment bearing sketches, symbols, and neat writing. They're in the abbey's workshop, sorting labels. Yes, actual product labels. Welcome to the medieval version of brand management. You wouldn't think monks needed branding. But as Benedictine goods, wine, beer manuscripts, herbal remedies, even cheese gained a reputation for quality, that reputation became its own form of currency. If a product came from a Benedictine monastery, people assumed it was well-made, fair-priced, and divinely blessed, if you asked the right monk. In one corner of the room, Brother Urban applies ink stamps to small linen tags. Each one features a cross and a regional symbol, a shell for coastal abbeys, a sheaf of wheat for inland ones, a simple stylized B for the order itself. Some even include the phrase Benedictine made written in the vernacular, so even peasants could recognize the mark. The monks didn't invent the idea of branding, but they elevated it. Their consistency literacy and transnational reach meant their name carried weight in markets from Genoa to Ghent. Some abbeys even developed specific product identities, St. Martin's ink or Holy Veil mead, and protected those reputations fiercely. You join a novice stacking crates of oil flasks. Each is sealed with wax, bearing the abbey's signet. He explains that knockoffs were an issue. Apparently, non-monastic sellers sometimes faked Benedictine marks to boost their sales. Scandalous? Yes. Effective? Also yes. Historians still debate whether these practices were conscious marketing or natural outgrowths of monastic order. Some say monks were too humble to advertise. Others argue that branding was a subtle but deliberate form of evangelism, using excellence in goods to reflect divine order. You're handed a small square of cheese wrapped in parchment. It smells pungent but divine. A faint pressed symbol identifies it as coming from this very abbey. You can't help but smile. That's branding right there, trust recognition, and a whisper of holiness in every bite. Back in the scriptorium, Brother Hildebrand is working on a new herbal compendium. His illuminated illustrations will make the final product more than functional. It will be beautiful, desirable, and distinctly monastic. The finished books are stored carefully, each marked with a reference number and the abbey's own hand-drawn ex libris. Not just property tags, proof of origin and pride. And when the abbey sends goods to market, oh, it's a whole production. Wagons are painted with simple, recognizable signs. Monks carry letters of authenticity. Goods are wrapped consistently, bundled identically, and stored with care. Even if you couldn't read, you knew a Benedictine crate when you saw one. One curious document in the Abbey archive details a complaint from a noble lady who insisted her candles smelled less sanctified than usual. The abbot responded with a gracious letter, a fresh batch of wax, and a psalm copied by hand. That, my friend, is medieval customer service. In the orchard, a visiting friar from another region shows off a differently stamped bottle of wine. The monks compare notes, share cuttings, and subtly flex about who's got the best fermentation technique. It's competitive in the gentlest possible way. You realize now that Benedictine branding wasn't flashy, it was quiet, careful, and rooted in values, consistency, humility, and craftsmanship. And it worked. Generations of pilgrims, merchants, and even rival clerics came to trust the sign of the black robe. As the day winds down, you pass the abbey gate, where a merchant is haggling with a lay brother over a crate of salted herbs. The merchant pauses, checks the wax seal, and nods. He's reassured. This isn't just any monastery, it's a Benedictine one. And that, in a world without Yelp or trademarks, made all the difference. You awake to the faint sound of murmured complaints, soft but unmistakable. No, it's not the monks this time. It's a group of town merchants outside the gate wagons idling, eyes narrowed. They've brought goods to market only to find their competition already here. Benedictine competition. For all their humility, the monks have become a thorn in the side of many a local businessman. You follow the noise to the edge of the marketplace, where barrels stamped with the abbey's insignia sit beside bolts of cloth and wheels of cheese. Everything priced modestly, but of visibly superior quality. It's hard to compete with God's supply chain. Some merchants whisper accusations of unfair advantage. Monks don't pay taxes the same way they have free labor from lay brothers and novices, and their customers treat every purchase like an act of piety. There's even a rumor, likely apocryphal, that one noble insisted on buying only divinely sanctioned ink for his legal contracts. Hard to beat that in a sales pitch. Historians still argue whether monastic wealth was seen as threatening or merely inconvenient. But by the 13th century, resentment had begun to grow, especially among local lords who noticed that the wealthiest landowners in the county weren't other nobles, they were monks. You walk past a legal clerk writing up a petition. It's a formal complaint lodged against this very abbey, accusing it of undue influence in the region's wool trade. The irony. The ink he's using probably came from their scriptorium. You stifle a laugh. Back in the abbey's chapter house, the monks are aware of the tension. During the daily reading of the Rule Brother, Edwin slips in a commentary from a church council, a reminder to maintain modesty in all dealings. But you notice he doesn't suggest shutting down the brewery or the guest house anytime soon. The monks have learned to walk a careful line. They give alms, generously host town festivals, and offer education to locals. Some even run basic schools. These acts soften the edges of their economic footprint. But it doesn't erase the fact that the monastery is often the richest and most stable institution for miles. In a shadowed corridor, you overhear two monks discussing a recent tax dispute. The local bishop wants a tithe from their fish pond profits. The abbot, ever patient, is drafting a letter reminding him that monastic lands are technically exempt. It's not war. It's chess played with parchment and seal. Even other clergy sometimes chafe. A nearby parish priest once grumbled that the abbey draws more souls with cheese than I do with sermons. And in one infamous case, a group of monks had to negotiate peace after a town militia attempted to seize a monastery's grain stores during a shortage. You visit the cellarer's office where a chalkboard shows recent price fluctuations. Flour is up, wool is steady, salt is scarce. Brother Clement adjusts numbers with the same ease you might use to edit a grocery list. He sees no contradiction between his vows and his spreadsheets. At the far end of the monastery, you stumble into a makeshift courtroom. A peasant woman is disputing a boundary marker with a tenant of the abbey. A monk mediates. He listens carefully, references the land rolls, and offers a solution: shared grazing rights and a fresh marker set under both their watch. Not perfect justice, but far from feudal chaos. As you step into the cold evening, bells ring for compline. The chants rise, echoing off the stone, peaceful, serene. Yet beneath that serenity simmers tension, not because the monks are greedy, but because they're effective. Their success, however modestly dressed, still casts long shadows. You return to your cell, thinking of merchants, lords, and bishops, some fuming, some fawning. The monastery's not just a place of prayer, it's a powerhouse. And like all powerhouses, it draws both awe and envy. The next morning, you're up early enough to catch the quiet shuffle of lay brothers entering the south cloister. They're not heading to prayer, though. These are the unsung hands behind the monastery's smooth operation, part secretary, part laborer, part human glue. Not everyone in the monastery wears a black habit. Lay brothers, often dressed in earth-toned robes without the signature hood, handle the heaviest and most practical tasks, carting firewood, cooking meals, tending fields, and most crucially, maintaining the monastery's ledgers and correspondence. They don't take full monastic vows, but they live within the walls and form the backbone of the Benedictine economy. You peek into the counting room, an unassuming space with 2 trestle tables, baskets of coins, and a chalkboard listing grain inventories. Brother Arnold, a lay brother with ink-stained sleeves, is hunched over a wax tablet, murmuring about wool shipments and annual tithes. Historians still debate the role of lay brothers in financial oversight. Some abbeys trusted them fully, allowing them to act as estate stewards or even manage international trade accounts. Others kept them at arm's length essential, but not quite equal. Either way, without them, the whole operation would grind to a halt faster than a broken mill wheel. You watch as a messenger arrives, another lay employee bearing a pouch of documents. He bows hands over the pouch and is rewarded with a fresh heel of monastery bread. Simple, direct, efficient. Further down the hall, you find the scriptorium's admin corner. A row of neat chests holds letters to other abbeys' invoices for parchment and a few less pious documents, price comparisons, rental contracts, and one very detailed list of which pigs are due for sale next month. One scroll is particularly thick. A list of abbey benefactors and their contributions, both past and expected. The margin notes include charmingly passive-aggressive reminders. Lord Henri still owes 1 ox. Lady Arabelle donated blanket, quality questionable. Back in the courtyard, a group of lay brothers loads a wagon. One stops to show you a tally stick, an old system of notching wood to track debts and deliveries. You nod, pretending to understand the complex series of notches, but it might as well be a secret code. The point is clear, even without coins, these monks run a ledgered life. You wander to the kitchen, where the cellarer and his assistants are using abacuses and counting beans, not metaphorically actual beans, sorted into pots to calculate portions for upcoming feast days. One brother jokes about bean spreadsheets, and you suspect he's the monastery comedian. As the bell for sext rings, the monks head to the chapel, while the lay brothers return to the fields and shops. Their work continues without the soundtrack of psalms, but it's no less devout. In the Benedictine world, labor is prayer, especially if it keeps the books balanced. Later during midday rest, the abbot meets with a handful of scribes and lay advisors. You sit quietly sipping cider as they discuss an upcoming audit by the bishop's envoy. Not for sins, at least, not spiritual ones. The bishop wants a full accounting of monastery assets. Just let him borrow our secretaries, one monk jokes. Then he'll wish he'd stayed with his choir boys. You chuckle quietly. These monks might be modest in their habits, but their administration is sharp, thorough, and occasionally cutting. Their economy isn't driven by ego. It's run by teamwork, consistency, and a surprisingly dry sense of humor. As the sun dips, you stroll past a lay brother still writing by lamplight. He's copying last month's transactions onto a clean sheet. Tomorrow, it'll be stored in the archive filed under Winter Ale Excess. You smile. The monks may not call them accountants, but here, every brother with a quill keeps the monastery's world turning. It's market day in the village, and the path from the monastery hums with movement. You join a caravan, 2 ox carts, 3 lay brothers, and 1 sheep that refuses to walk in a straight line. They're heading out with baskets of cheese, salt dried herbs, and a small barrel of ink. You're witnessing something remarkable, a medieval supply chain managed by monks with the calm precision of a modern logistics team. At first glance, the system seems simple. Goods made in the monastery are packed, labeled, and transported to nearby markets. But the further you walk, the more complex it becomes. The cheese comes from an outlying dairy run by lay tenants. The salt was traded from a coastal abbey weeks ago. The herbs were dried using a rotation system designed to preserve potency and avoid waste. And the ink. That's a recipe, so secret only 2 monks know it, and one of them won't speak until Lent is over. Each monastery operates as a hub in a quiet pan-European trade network. You pass a milestone etched with symbols indicating known abbey routes. The path is safe maintained and shared knowledge among travelers who know how to read its signs. At a stream crossing, one brother checks a scroll with weight and delivery estimates. He frowns too much moisture in the flour sacks. They rearrange the load to keep it dry. It's small decisions like this that kept the monks' system reliable, even without spreadsheets or cloud storage. You reach the village market by midday. Monks set up beside secular traders. They don't shout prices or haggle. They simply display their wares with a modest sign, monastic goods fair, exchange only. Within an hour-half, the stock is gone. The villagers trust Benedictine products. They know the ink doesn't run. The cheese lasts through winter, and the herbs won't poison your guests. That kind of reputation doesn't just come from prayer. It's the result of centuries of quietly refining every link in the chain. Back at the abbey, you follow the caravan's return route. Empty crates, bags of coin, and a few odd trades one merchant insisted on paying with a bolt of velvet. The monks accepted. Velvet becomes altar cloth. Nothing is wasted. In the workshop, Brother Hugo records the returns. He uses chalk on slate first, then copies it to parchment in careful Latin. Delivered 14, he notes. Returned 3, unsold. 1 bartered for plow blade. His face shows no pride, no stress, just quiet focus. Historians still argue whether monastic trade was driven by need or by a desire to outperform secular systems. Either way, it worked. Monasteries kept people fed when lords were feuding. They stocked herbs that could dull a toothache when physicians were unavailable. They moved goods with reliability that kings envied. You visit the storage vault, cool, dry, silent. It holds dried fish, flax bundles, beeswax, and a shelf of thick parchment labeled by date and region. A faded scroll details a shipment of cloaks sent to a northern monastery during a brutal winter. No one requested payment. Upstairs, the abbot signs off on next week's shipping. He uses a bone stylus and hot wax to seal his approval. 1 barrel of ale goes east. 2 rolls of wool head south. A basket of apples is labeled, "For Brother Cadful, do not squish." Even their humor travels. As you head to your bed for the night, you glance at the abbey gate where tomorrow's cart waits. It's already packed and ready, because, in this world of prayer and parchment, someone always thinks one step ahead. You sit in the chapel the next morning, watching golden light stream through the stained glass. A monk is preaching not a sermon about fire and brimstone, but one about thrift. To waste is to wound creation, he says softly. To save is to serve both man and God. That's not just theology, it's business. And here begins your quiet education in the spiritual economics of the Benedictines. Frugality in this monastery isn't a chore, it's a calling. Every scrap of parchment, every leftover crust of bread, every broken bucket handle is considered with care. Waste is sin adjacent, especially when you live by vows that prize simplicity and stewardship. After morning prayer, you follow Brother Anselm to the storeroom. He's reusing bits of old wax seals to make new ones. Why? Melt new wax, he murmurs, when the old still remembers its shape. You're not sure if it's poetry or procurement logic, but it works. Even the latrine waste is collected in carefully dug pits, then processed into compost for the herb gardens. You recall that Egyptian crocodile dung sunscreen from earlier sections and wonder, is there any era of history where dung wasn't secretly valuable? In the abbey kitchen, you watch as Brother Roderick invents a stew, using last night's bread crusts, wilted herbs, and a sliver of goat cheese. It's delicious and unrepeatable. Each day's thrift creates a new recipe. Historians still debate whether monastic thrift was a moral virtue or a logistical necessity. Some argue it stemmed from theological ideals of humility and stewardship. Others say it was simple common sense born from centuries of surviving famines and sieges. Both camps agree monks did more with less than almost anyone else. You pass a lay brother, carefully straightening crooked nails to reuse in the workshop. On a shelf nearby, a collection of broken pottery has been patched with lead staples and pitch. You touch one bowl gently. It's warmer than you expected. Used, repaired, revered. Even in their accounting, the monks practice economy. Double-entry ledgers exist, but many abbeys preferred coded shorthand. One parchment shows a full year of sheep shearing records compressed into 30 lines. 15 fleeces, one reads less, 2 for mice, 1 for Father Thomas's cold feet. The rule of St. Benedict doesn't mention spreadsheets, but it's full of thrift. Let nothing be wasted. Let all things be treated as sacred vessels. When you realize this applies even to the firewood, which is stacked in perfectly aligned cords, you begin to wonder if the monks were secretly early engineers. In the infirmary, you help refill medicine jars. The tinctures are made from foraged herbs, rainwater, and the occasional pinch of imported spice. You notice how carefully the monks measure each ingredient. Waste not, and if a jar is too full to seal, use it first. If it's cracked, reinforce the base with waxed linen. If it's useless, grind it down to grit and use it to scour cauldrons. You ask Brother Cedric if they ever throw things away. He thinks for a long time before answering, only sins and spoiled ink. As night falls, you reflect on the hidden power of monastic thrift. It wasn't flashy. It didn't earn praise from nobles or songs from bards. But it built resilience. It made abundance from scarcity. And over time, it quietly accumulated into something far greater than mere savings. It became a culture of sacred resourcefulness. You pull your blanket tighter, noting the patchwork repairs. Even your bed is part of this legacy. Sleep comes easily, knowing that in this world of frugality, even dreams are probably recycled. You wake to a strange stillness, not silence. There's always a rustle of robes or distant bell, but something quieter beneath the surface, something tense. You sense it in the way Brother Thomas avoids eye contact, or how the novice sweeping the cloister doesn't hum today. Something's brewing, and for once, it's not ale. The abbey is in the midst of a quiet crisis. You find yourself in the chapter house where the abbot prior and a few senior monks are deep in discussion. Words like temptation mission and mission drift through the heavy air. It's not an argument, it's a reckoning. The monastery has grown rich, not flashy rich, but wealthy enough to be noticed. Enough that some brothers worry they've strayed from the rule of Saint Benedict. The vow of poverty, after all, wasn't supposed to mean managing vineyards, shipping goods, and issuing receipts. You sit quietly as Brother Leo, a wiry older monk with a permanent squint, speaks with calm urgency. Have we built a kingdom? He asks, or merely inherited one we no longer understand? Around him, heads nod slowly. Historians still argue whether tensions like this were common in medieval monasteries. Some claim they were rare crises of conscience. Others see them as inevitable growing pains of religious institutions trying to balance their ideals with earthly survival. The younger monks are mostly quiet. They've grown up with full granaries and regular trade. The idea of scaling back feels like throwing away everything they've built. The elders are more wary. They remember when the guest house was drafty, the meals thin, and the library less gilded. You follow the abbot later to the refectory, where he dines in silence beside the others. His eyes flicker toward the freshly embroidered tablecloth, gifted last week by a wealthy merchant whose son discovered his calling in the scriptorium. That tablecloth, the abbot knows, costs more than their annual candle budget. After dinner, he slips into the chapel alone. You follow at a respectful distance. There in the candlelight, he opens the rule and rereads the chapter on moderation. Let the abbot take care to avoid all extravagance, it says. Let his life be a mirror of discipline for all. You sense his weariness, not regret perhaps, but the weight of leadership. You wonder how many abbots over the centuries have stood in that same spot, balancing a quill in one hand and a conscience in the other. In the dormitory, Brother Hugo confides his own doubts. I joined to pray, he says softly, not to balance ledgers. But then he chuckles. Still, I do like the smell of a fresh batch of ink. You spend the evening in the scriptorium, where the younger monks continue their copying, blissfully focused. There's peace in repetition, in faithful labor. And maybe that's the point. The rule was never about erasing prosperity, but grounding it in purpose. In the courtyard, two novices argue over whether to replace a worn sandal or repair it again. The decision, as with all things here, is measured, purposeful, and carried out with an eye toward both eternity and next week's market run. As the final bell rings, you sit alone under a fig tree watching the stars emerge. You think of abbots torn between ambition and asceticism, of monks unsure whether their success is a blessing or a burden, and of the soft tension that hums beneath this holy empire. In the end, it isn't a collapse or a schism. It's a slow, internal question, one asked in every age by every faithful institution. How much is enough? By dawn, the tension of the previous day has softened like mist, fading over the fields. The monks move with their usual quiet rhythm. Bells ring, prayers rise, and bread bakes in the oven just as it has for centuries. Whatever doubts may linger, the abbey continues. And with it, so does its legacy. You step into the archive room, a low-ceiling chamber filled with scrolls, chests, and wooden cabinets. Dust motes float like spirits in the angled sunlight. Here is where the real monument to the Benedictines lives, not in statues or altars, but in ink. The monks have been documenting everything. Land records, trade agreements, medicinal recipes, letters, sermons, rainfall logs, even notes on which cow has the most stubborn personality. It's part of their nature, to preserve, to remember, to record. You run your fingers across a bound manuscript labeled Annales Monastery. The entries are humble frost, early this year. Brother Jerome sneezed 8 times during Vespers, but others hold weight, harvest double yield. Donated land from Countess Helena 2 vineyards. Scriptorium added 3 scribes. What begins as trivia becomes a legacy, a chronicle of not just what the monks did, but how they shaped the world around them. Historians still argue how deliberate this was. Did the monks know they were curating history, or were they just being meticulous? Either way, the result is the same. An empire carved in calligraphy updated daily. Outside, Brother Matthias is training 2 novices in inventory methods. He doesn't call it training, but that's what it is. Knowledge passed down like torchlight flickering, but never extinguished. In the guest house, you overhear a traveler from Lombardy asking to buy a copy of the abbey's herbal manual. Everyone trusts your monks, he says. Even the nobles back home drink your cough syrup. The monk behind the desk nods amused. The syrup is divine, he replies, but it's the copyist's hand that earns the coin. You watch a cart being loaded with crates destined for other abbeys. One is filled with manuscripts, another with cured meats, and a third with small packets of lavender. All neatly packed, labeled, and accompanied by wax-sealed invoices. Logistics, as always, handled with near mystical calm. Later, the abbot hosts a visiting delegation, 3 friars from the east here to study the abbey's model. He greets them with wine bread and a prepared tour of the grain silos. You smile. Hospitality and marketing, all in one. That evening, Brother Cedric invites you to the scriptorium again. We're updating our copy of the rule, he says. Some phrases need refining. You sit beside him, watching as he painstakingly recrafts a line. Let all things be done with moderation and with care. The ink glistens before it dries. The sentence, like the abbey itself, is both old and newly alive. In your final stroll across the cloister, you notice small things: a repaired wheelbarrow, a stack of wax tablets ready for reuse, a young monk quietly humming as he counts grain sacks. The Benedictine Empire doesn't thunder. It never did. It whispers in systems, thrives in order, and endures by knowing exactly when to grow and when to pause. As the night bell tolls, you lie in your cell, once more reflecting. This was never a story of wealth for its own sake. It was about continuity. The monks weren't chasing riches. They were building resilience. One prayer, one ledger, one cheese wheel at a time. It's your last day at the monastery. The bells sound different this morning, more distant, as if already echoing in memory. You walk the grounds slowly, every corner, now familiar. But one question lingers. What's the legacy of all this? What does it mean? This quiet business empire wrapped in vows and scripture. You begin where all things begin. Here, the chapel. The monks chant the morning office voices rising in gentle waves. It's the same chant sung 1,000 years ago, the same cadence that once echoed across stone walls from Ireland to Italy. You close your eyes and let the sound wash over you. It's not grand or stirring, it's steady, like everything else the Benedictines have built. Afterward, you walk with Brother Oswin to the orchard. He's pruning apple trees with slow precision, talking about next year's grafting plans. We plant for those who'll eat long after we're gone, he says simply. That could be the motto for the entire monastery. In the granary, lay brothers count the spring yield. In the workshop, tools are sharpened and stored. And in the scriptorium, pages keep turning. Even as the world outside churns with wars, politics, and plagues, this place endures. Not because it resists change, but because it absorbs it, translates it, and writes it down. Historians still debate how much of modern capitalism traces back to places like this. Double-entry bookkeeping, international logistics, early branding. Even scalable management systems all whisper with monastic fingerprints. But the monks wouldn't call it capitalism. They'd call it stewardship. You pass a ledger open on a desk. The last entry reads simply, 3 loaves gifted to the poor. One was warm. That's legacy too. Not just economics, but ethics. A reminder that every exchange carries weight, and every act of care leaves a mark. In the guest house, a child laughs. A pilgrim hums while bandaging his feet. A monk pours cider for a traveler with shaking hands. These aren't transactions. They're moments in a larger story, a centuries-long story of deliberate, faithful living. You sit beneath a fig tree one last time. A breeze carries the scent of lavender and beeswax. The sun warms your face. You think of all the things this place has made Ale Ink Scrolls cheese community. But above all, it has made time feel slower, more intentional, more human. The bells toll again. Compline. One more service. One more gentle end. So now, as you lie in the stillness of your own room, miles and centuries away from that abbey, let your thoughts drift gently back. The warm scent of bread rising at dawn, the soft scratch of quills in the scriptorium, the rustle of robes in a stone corridor cooled by centuries of breath and prayer. Picture the quiet precision of hands measuring grain. A novice counting candle stubs by moonlight. A lay brother humming over a vat of ink. Every movement slow, every decision made with care. There's no rush here, no notifications, no deadlines, just a rhythm as old as the stones beneath their sandals. Let yourself breathe in that stillness, that balance of prayer and practicality, that calm assurance that even the most ordinary work can be sacred when done with purpose. You're safe here in this memory, protected not by walls, but by the weight of tradition, gently wrapping around you like a thick wool blanket. Even now, you might hear a bell in your imagination, soft, far off, calling, not to action, but to rest, to stillness, to the knowledge that somewhere in the past, and maybe in some small corner of the world, still today, there were people quietly building a life where nothing was wasted, where every gesture mattered, where work and worship walked hand in hand. So breathe out. Let your shoulders fall. The fig tree rustles. The abbey door closes. And somewhere, Brother Oswin is pruning a branch that won't bear fruit for years. But someone will eat it someday, and it will taste of calm. And if this quiet world of bees, prayers, barley, and Brother Oswin's fig tree has brought you even a little peace tonight, share this moment with someone who might need it too. And if you'd like to wander through more forgotten corners of history with me, don't forget to subscribe. The next story is already waiting just beyond the next bell.